Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much.
Hi, everyone. My name is Maya Dukmasova. I'm a senior reporter at Injustice Watch, and thank you all for joining us for tonight's conversation. I want to thank our hosts as well, Injustice Watch and the Chicago Reader. And we are working together following the publication of Kelly Garcia's article about deep-rooted problems in Cook County's domestic violence courthouse. This will be a conversation with advocates and domestic abuse survivors. Acknowledging that navigating the court system is challenging, we understand how important it is to talk about the court's systems, its structural issues, and what resources are available through the government and other providers, and what else is needed in order for survivors to safely navigate the court system. So we hope this event informs you about some of the resources available if you or your loved one is trying to find recourse for domestic violence in court. And we also hope it sparks more conversation and solidarity with survivors in your community. Just a little content warning before we get started. Please be aware that this event may include descriptions of violence and include difficult conversations about violence. So take care and please feel free to step away as you need. So to begin tonight's event, it's my pleasure to introduce Sandra Brown. And before we hear from Sandra, who will share a spoken word poem, a few words about her. Sandra Brown holds an MA in Humanities from California State University, Dominguez Hills, and is a doctoral student enrolled in California Coast University's EDD program in organizational leadership. Sandra served 22 years in the Illinois Department of Corrections as an incarcerated survivor. Despite challenges to accessing higher education in prison, Brown became the first incarcerated woman in Illinois to pledge and gain acceptance into the Gamma Pi Delta Honor Society, the first incarcerated woman in Illinois to earn an academic master's degree, and the first incarcerated woman in Illinois accepted into an academic doctoral program. As a visiting scholar with the Women's Justice Institute, she prepared a policy research paper recommending collaborative strategies to support higher education degree programs in Illinois women's prisons. And now Sandra continues to help empower justice-impacted women and end criminalized survival with the Women's Justice Institute as a senior advisor. So now I'm going to leave it to Sandra.
Thank you. What happened? We know the answer because we've been here before, but we still ask. We ask because we can't believe we're here again. We swore we'd see it coming next time. The jokingly serious criticism cloaked as playful banter. The silencing of our voices via interruption, invalidation, and shoutdowns, mislabeled as passion. Love isn't always blind. Abuse masterfully disguises itself until it's in control. When did it all change? Lines so blurred like sight after punches, no one can really tell. But we still ask. When did the heart that beats for you become the hearts beaten black and blue by you? When did words, once food for soul, so sweet to spirit, become weapons of mass destruction in the quest to be right? When did this mouth, this same mouth, once prized for adding life to your life, become nothing more than a receptacle for the contents of your loins? Indeed, this mouth now works to disempower, dismantle, and dismiss this malicious disrespect. Not having it. Why don't they leave? They all ask, as if it's the easiest thing to do. Are you listening? You ask as if I raised my hand when I was that hopeful and precocious little girl, fooled by the fallacy that the world was my oyster, and said that when I grow up, I want to survive hands that once cradled me and taught me how to tie my shoes. Hands that once wiped my tears and took my hand in matrimony. Hands that claimed to love me. But I ask, where were you? At any time, did you pick up the phone because I was too busy protecting my teeth and my kids from those same steel-toed boots that greeted your doorstep with the friendliest of highs? Were you at my bedside with doctors who refused to show me a mirror the last time I attempted your ingenious suggestion? Did you post my bail, watch my kids, let me stay at your place, or help me find somewhere to go when I did call 911 that last time before the last time, and they arrested me too? Oh, okay then. But that one time, that only time I fought back, the world in which I existed screamed for justice. They demanded that she show up swiftly, and she did. I broke a law to save my life, but justice called it a crime. I broke a law to save my life, but justice called for time. Though time after time, she was nowhere to be found when I called for her. Nowhere to be found when tension ticked and temper talked. And at the end of the day, justice for me was just me. Why do we stay? Answers will vary. Though we know none of them will make real sense, but we still ask. Our answers never address why. They simply justify. Because we love them. For the kids, we had no choice. Oh, they never mean it. They don't know any better. They will change. We've been through too much to give up now. We'll go to jail too. No one will do anything. No one will believe us. They might kill us. Completely clueless to the fact that we're already dead inside from the lies we continue to ingest. We just haven't laid down, which means we can look up, which means we can get up, which means we can rise up, which means your time just might be up. When will it end? When it ends depends. When hands that weigh the lives of survivors calibrate facts with truth, it will end. When hands that shape our stories value our voices, it will end. When hands that render verdicts temper justice with mercy, it will end. When it ends depends. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that powerful poem, Sandra. That was really beautiful. So now I'd like to bring on the moderator for tonight's conversation, Kelly Garcia, who's the author of the article that started this whole event. Kelly Garcia is a staff writer for the Chicago Reader. She was previously a summer reporting resident for Injustice Watch and a civic reporting fellow for City Bureau.
Thank you so much, Maya. I appreciate that. And thank you again to Sandra for that powerful piece. First, I just want to thank Injustice Watch and the Chicago Reader for making this event possible, and of course to our panelists and to all the attendees watching. So our investigation began last summer, thanks to advocates who were raising the alarm about problems in the courthouse related to the pandemic that were preventing survivors from accessing services to the court. As I dug into these issues, I kept finding myself back at the former top judge of the courthouse, Raul Vega. For several months, we investigated his history on the bench, as well as uncovered accusations from women who say he mistreated them. I spoke to women who had cases that went before him, and I also spoke to women who had previously worked with him. Though the piece was specific to one judge, the broader theme of the story really focused on how to hold judges accountable, and a lot of those structural gaps that were essentially failing survivors who were seeking legal support. During our reporting, Vega eventually retired, and the chief judge of the Circuit Court of Cook County announced that he was recommending an investigation into an incident involving Judge Vega. He was able to retire with a $14,000 monthly pension, but a lot of the problems that I had originally reported on they're still present, and so that's where we're all here today. I think this is a good opportunity for us to talk about, what is it like to safely navigate the Cook County Domestic Violence Court, especially for folks who may not be familiar, and also to collaboratively envision a court system that centers the needs of survivors. So that being said, I'd like to welcome our panelists for tonight. Thank you all so much for joining us. I'd like to allow them all to briefly introduce themselves as well. Hi all, thank you so much for joining us. So Mallory, do you want to kick us off? Do you want to briefly tell us about yourself and your experience in the court system?
Yes, good evening. Thank you everybody for joining us. Sandra, that piece was so powerful. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us and being vulnerable. My name is Mallory. I am the legal director at the Chicago Alliance Against Sexual Exploitation. We're here to talk about 555, as the lawyers call it, the DV courthouse. I'm sure you've noticed the title of my organization includes sexual. So although the domestic violence courthouse, the bulk of the work they do surrounds domestic violence, survivors of sexual assault can also go there to seek services such as a protective order. And so at CAASE, I run the legal department, and all of the attorneys represent survivors of sexual assault and sex trafficking free of charge. And as a result, we spend a lot of time at 555 at the domestic violence courthouse.
Thank you so much, Mallory. Alisa, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and your interactions with the court system?
Sure. I'm currently a public school teacher, and I first began learning about the court system several years ago. It began with a divorce, and then after the divorce, there were just some things that were going on that made me feel uncomfortable. So I went to get an order of protection. And with the order of protection, the date that I was scheduled to appear at the court downtown, I was filed the day, well, I was served the day before with papers for custody for my daughter. So that date was literally set for the same day as the protection order case. So I was unable to go through with that. But it resulted in 6 months of going back and forth, fighting to get my daughter back, and just learning about how easily people fall through the cracks with the court system.
Thank you so much, Alisa. And for those of you watching on YouTube, you can also find the link to our story in which we feature Alisa's story in the YouTube description. Thank you again. Amanda, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and the work that you do?
Absolutely. Thank you, Kelly. And thank you for this report. It was incredibly impactful, and it's made such a huge difference in the lives of survivors accessing the court. And Sandra, your testimony was fantastic. And thank you for really setting the stage for what we're going to talk about, for the myriad of ways that the justice system impacts survivors. We often think of those seeking redress from the court, and we don't give equal time to those who are on the other side of the courtroom. And 555, I think, equally harms every survivor coming into the court charged or seeking support. My name is Amanda Pyron. I'm the Executive Director of the Network Advocating Against Domestic Violence. We educate, advocate, and organize to end domestic and sexual violence throughout the Cook County metropolitan region. We also operate the Illinois Domestic Violence Hotline, which received over 32,000 contacts for support last year alone from survivors across the state of Illinois. We interact with so many people who work at 555, who go to 555 to seek support through our advocacy and organizing work. We hear the good, the bad, the challenging, and last summer we actually spearheaded an effort to try to change operating procedures at the court, working with judges and advocates and attorneys based in the courthouse to try to improve the system. And we weren't as successful as we would have liked. So Kelly, again, your reporting was really what has managed to move the needle on this issue. And we could not thank you enough for that.
Thank you all so much for that. So for folks who may not be familiar, let's talk about 555. Mallory, do you want to tell us a little bit about how do people end up at the Cook County Domestic Violence Courthouse?
Yes, definitely. So the most common way is through an interaction with some kind of police department. For example, let's say that you are in an abusive relationship and you've called 911. When a police officer comes to the scene, more likely than not, they're going to say, no matter what happens, an arrest or not, they're going to say, we suggest you go to 555 and get a protective order. And there's a bunch of different kinds of protective orders you can get, but a protective order is essentially a restraining order that will prohibit your abuser from coming near you, your home, your children, and you can also include pets and cars and things of that nature. Sometimes people Google and figure out, I need help. I am in an abusive relationship. What do I do? Illinois Legal Aid Online has a plethora of resources, and that includes directing you to 555, that courthouse.
And as a follow-up, so during my reporting, I talked to a lot of people who also started at the family court, at the domestic relations courthouse. What's the difference between those two, Mallory? How does one decide where your case gets assigned to?
You actually don't get to decide 100%. If you are married to your partner and you are filing for divorce or filing for custody, that's going to happen at the Daly Center in domestic relations court. And that's exactly what happened to Alisa. She had a case there. If you want a protective order unrelated to your dissolution of your marriage, unrelated to custody, that's when you go to 555. Unfortunately, most people are not aware that there is a rule. If you have a case already pending at the Daly Center, your divorce has already started, custody has already been initiated, you cannot go to 555. If you go there and initiate the case, the judge is going to say, I'm sorry, we need to merge the two cases and send you to Daly Center. Which makes sense for judicial efficiency. It does not make sense for being trauma informed because, like I said, if you are not an attorney, there's really no way for you to know that that rule exists.
Thank you for that. Something else that we included in our story was that 90% of survivors who are walking into domestic violence court are pro se litigants or people who are representing themselves in court without an attorney. Alisa, when I first spoke to you for the story, you told me initially that you had gone to court as a pro se litigant, you didn't have an attorney, and then you eventually decided to get one. So can you tell us a little bit more about what was it like to represent yourself in court, and why did you eventually decide to get an attorney?
It was terrifying because, again, I got served the day before court, and it was unexpected. And it was the judge, Vega, who literally told me that I should get an attorney because he said that, not exactly what he said, but basically he said that most people that don't have attorneys don't win. So I didn't know where to go. I didn't know where to look. I called many organizations. They were either too full, they were unable to help me. So I spoke to a friend that had recently hired an attorney, and that attorney was able to represent me. But even initially working with that attorney, I don't think that he completely understood what women such as myself go through. So it took him some time, like over a period of a month, just talking to me and learning about what led up to why we were going to court. And one day he got it and he said, oh, it's about control. And then once he started to get it, then I started to feel more comfortable going to court. But I had a lot of anxiety having to go back and forth in court, especially in the beginning when I did not have an attorney, because it took me some time to find one. They're pretty pricey. Most attorneys wanted at least $300 an hour. I went to one attorney who was referred to me by a friend who's a paralegal who knows about that judge. I went to that attorney and that attorney said, okay, I know this judge. If you want to win, you need to do X, Y, and Z, including to not date the person that I was dating at the time. And I just wasn't willing to change who I was just to present myself in court. So it literally took me some time to find an attorney that I felt comfortable with. And even with that attorney, it took me some time to really get through to him to where I felt that he understood who I was and what was really going on.
Thank you for sharing that, Alisa. Amanda, yeah, let's talk about, why there are so many people who are pro se litigants. As Alisa just mentioned, cost was a barrier. Is that something that you've seen across the board as well with other, people who've gone to court? And how does that impact someone's case?
Well, absolutely. We see this happen time and time again. Our legal aid providers are constantly full. They have larger caseloads than they'd probably like, trying to take as many survivors for free as they can. We received over 4,200 calls to the Illinois Domestic Violence Hotline last year, just for legal referrals for orders of protection. So there's an enormous demand for legal aid and for support in filing an order of protection, and we just don't have enough public interest attorneys to meet that need. It's a difficult system to navigate for an advocate, for an attorney. The court system does not make it easy. It is not straightforward. Oftentimes, materials aren't printed in languages other than English, especially across the state of Illinois, but even here in Cook County, one of the most diverse counties in the country, and we don't often have materials that are available in other languages such as Spanish or Polish or Mandarin Chinese. Interpreters have been difficult to come by. And in fact, it wasn't until 18 months into the pandemic that we got the Cook County court system to be able to use interpreters via Zoom, which is a free service. And so, and that took a lot of advocacy, Kelly. It wasn't easy. The presiding judge, Raul Vega, who was the feature of your report, told us time and time again he just couldn't locate interpreters. And luckily we were able to get Chief Judge Evans to detail someone and have the issue resolved in about an hour. So the system can be friendly. It can be much more amenable to the needs of survivors. It just simply isn't. And in fact is designed, I think, to discourage active victim participation. And simply isn't resourced enough to meet the need of survivors in Cook County.
Yeah, I was first introduced to you, Amanda, when you spoke at a Cook County Board of Commissioners meeting. I remember I was covering that. You talked about a woman over the summer who was turned away from the court, what was like a 3 p.m. on a Friday in 90-degree weather, after she was trying to file an emergency order of protection. Can you tell us a little bit more about those challenges that the pandemic has presented to survivors who are trying to access the court?
Absolutely. I mean, there's this myth among elected officials, among community advocates, that there are just enough resources and that if a survivor wants to leave, they can leave. And that just is simply not true. Survivors are trapped in a universe of bad choices, and they are simply working every single day to choose the least bad option, right? And oftentimes that takes them to the courthouse thinking, okay, perhaps if I get an order of protection, if the police tell him to stay away, if a court tells him to stay away, he'll finally leave me alone and I'll be done, right? And we just simply don't make that process easy enough or accessible enough. And during the COVID-19 pandemic, survivors were left without the safety nets that they had designed for themselves. Again, survivors are constantly renegotiating with themselves what they can do to keep themselves safe, what they can do to keep their children safe. And many survivors found that those safety plans that they had designed weren't available. You couldn't go to a grandparent's house. You couldn't go to work, right? You couldn't stagger your work schedules with your abusive partner because neither of you were working, or you were both working from home. And so they were forced into a courthouse to get an order of protection, perhaps to have someone leave a house or stay away from a house, or to Mallory's point, make decisions regarding a child or childcare, custody, or other items. And so they came to the court in higher numbers. They called the hotline in much higher numbers, looking for that safety planning and support. And the resources weren't there. It took Cook County a long time to transition to remote in an effective way. Often remote wasn't available when survivors needed it. The physical courthouse was closed. Communication was abysmal, even with people who worked in the courthouse. So we'd have advocates calling me saying, I'm not sure this is open. I'm not sure what to do. Just chaos, really, for many, many weeks. And again, that was a leadership issue, right? There was no leadership in the domestic violence division to navigate the court through this crisis, and it had a very negative impact on survivors.
So we've talked a lot about these orders of protection, and in my story, I spoke to a lot of survivors who started their cases with an emergency order of protection. Mallory, can you tell us a little bit more about what that is, and what are all the different types of protective orders that you can get through the court?
Yes, so I'm going to take a step back. When we talk about protective orders, generally at 555, we're talking about 3 different ones: an order of protection, a civil no contact order, and a stalking no contact order. When we're talking about domestic violence, most of those individuals are going to qualify for an order of protection. That's under the Illinois Domestic Violence Act. A civil no contact order is most likely used in cases where there's been a sexual assault. And then a stalking no contact order is for individuals who are being stalked or harassed by someone that they're not related to, basically a stranger, someone they've not been in an intimate relationship with. For all 3 of those orders, you can go to court and get an emergency. I think it's very important to note that all you get is an emergency when you go to court, and that is only if the judge says yes. You can ask for an emergency order of protection, an emergency civil no contact order, or an emergency stalking no contact order, and the judge can say no. In the event that the judge says yes for any of those 3, you have to come back to court in 21 days, which is related to serving the other party and giving them notice of this court case. But your order is only good for 21 days. So if you don't come back on that 21st day, the court is going to dismiss it. It is also important to note that the long-term order, we call it a plenary. It's the same plenary order of protection, plenary civil no contact order, or plenary stalking no contact order, lasts for 2 years, but you basically have to have a little trial in front of the judge with the other party there. If you both have lawyers, your lawyers will be there. If you don't have lawyers, you'll be representing yourself, giving the judge all of the evidence, whether that's text messages, videos, voicemail, pictures, all of that stuff. It's kind of like a trial you see on Law and Order. You have to prove your case. And I think that can be really problematic for survivors. One, most people don't know that. When they go to get that protective order, no matter which 3 of the ones we're talking about, they think, oh, I got my emergency, it's done with. So when they come back on that 21st date and the judge is like, I'm going to set your case out for another few months so we can have a hearing. Do you have any witnesses? The opposing party has given me your intimate text messages. I heard a voicemail with you on it. They're very surprised and didn't understand that that was part of the process. So again, just to recap, 3 protective orders. When you go on that first day, all you're going to get is the emergency. And then you have to come back later and basically have a trial for your long-term plenary order.
As a follow-up to that, Mallory, I'm curious from you again. How long do these cases last usually? Is there an average time, or does that vary?
I have had cases be wrapped up within a month or two if the other party agrees to it or if the court calendar isn't very full. But like Amanda said, that call volume was really high at the network because there are so many survivors. And when all of those individuals go to the courthouse, up until recently, there were only 2 judges that heard these kind of cases. So back in January, judges were setting hearings for May, June, July, and August. And so that means that your case could have been taking place for a year and a half before you even get to the judge to ask for that long-term 2-year order.
Thank you for that. And as we saw in the story, right, we had cases ranging from 6 months to 11 years. Alisa, what was at stake for you as you were awaiting a decision in your case?
Well, what started off for me going for an order of protection ended up with, again, when I went back for the trial date, that was also the same date for custody of my daughter. I had 50-50 with my ex, where I would have her a week, he would have her a week, but he filed for full custody. And I didn't quite understand what that entailed, because I first went to court. I was expecting one thing that day and ended up in a position to where I lost my daughter that day, although the judge said that there was no evidence of anything that my ex was claiming, that she would remain with him until we finished the court process. That went on for 6 months. So for 6 months, it got to the point to where I was not allowed to see my daughter. I would go to her school. I had a school, a small private school. She was allowed to be taken out of my school. She was put in another school. The only way I would be able to see her is I would go there and ask the people in the office, could she come to see me? And again, it took 6 months of just going back and forth in court with Judge Vega. And it was extremely difficult because in the beginning, when I first started to go to court with my attorney, I thought that it would be over with quickly, that they would clearly see that these charges were false and things would go back to normal. And I soon began to see that that wasn't the case. And every time I would go to court, every time I got a new date, we might only be in front of the judge for maybe 5 minutes, and then they would give another date, and then another date, and then another date, and another date, to the point again where it took 6 months and cost me over $10,000 in legal fees.
Thank you for that. Amanda, can we talk about some of the changes that have happened in court during the pandemic? I know a lot has changed in the last year, but can you tell us a little bit more about that in terms of accessibility?
Absolutely. I mean, we were really fortunate that eventually the Domestic Violence Division did move to hearing cases remotely. And so survivors were able to petition for an emergency order of protection or attend a hearing for a plenary order of protection remotely, which really increased access and reduced a lot of the barriers that survivors face when coming to court. You know, when you're at home with children who are remote learning or who aren't in school, or you're ill, or perhaps, you know, working from home, you can't get to the courthouse, even when it is open, in the relatively short hours of the day that it's open. And so having a remote hearing option enabled additional survivors to participate in court during the pandemic and since then as well. You know, the court's childcare room still isn't opened since the pandemic, and so survivors with children are greatly impacted by that. And so it's imperative that we maintain sufficient remote access so survivors are able to attend these hearings remotely and access justice safely.
Mallory, you talked earlier about a case and the variety of resources that you all offer to survivors. What resources are available for survivors who are seeking support outside of the legal system?
Well, to be honest, it really depends on what you're comfortable with. Illinois just it's almost been a year now, passed a law that allows for confidentiality in restorative justice. So many survivors that I talk to, not all, restorative justice is not something that everybody is going to want to be involved with, but there are definitely entities like the Center for Conflict Resolution that can do healing circles or different types of restorative justice. We also partner with the rape crisis centers in the Chicagoland area. So the YWCA, Resilience, Mujeres, Northwest CAASE, they all have great programs that include counseling, different types of therapy, art therapy. Inside of CAASE, we partner with Surviving the Mic that allows survivors like Sandra to express whatever they want to express, however they want to express it, be it by poetry or music or spoken word. And I think what is important when we're talking about resources outside of the justice system is, what do you want to do as a survivor? What do you feel comfortable with? And the reason why I listed such a wide variety is because not everybody wants to go to therapy. Not everybody wants to go to restorative justice. Not everybody wants to do poetry. But having access to all of those things means you get to take some of your control back. You get to make the choice about what you want to do. Because as we've talked about so clearly here, the justice system doesn't always give you justice. And even if it does, it's not necessarily going to be a smooth ride.
Thank you for that, Mallory. Alisa, this next question is for you, but also I'd love to hear from everyone else as well. As someone who had to, directly interact with the court system, what are some changes that you would like to see in the court system to help survivors safely navigate these issues?
I think one suggestion would be the same way that if I go to a hotel or if I go to a restaurant and I get to fill out a comment box, that the people who go to these courtrooms should be able to comment on their experience. If I had been allowed to just tell 1/10 of how I felt that I was being treated, things possibly would have changed years ago. But now we see that there have been possibly hundreds of women that have had similar issues to what I've had, and our voices were never heard. So even if we had just had the opportunity to just tell someone, look, this is how the judge made me feel, this is how he spoke to me, I think that still will make a big difference. Also, the amount of time that we're seeing in front of a judge. You can't get much done in 5-10 minutes. You can't. So maybe they shouldn't have so many cases in that one session. And then also, people might be reluctant to really speak their truth if there's a courtroom full of other people. In my case, there were not only other people that are waiting to be seen by the judge, but there were law students in there, other attorneys, other people that would make you feel uncomfortable sharing what's going on and just to speak out to get the assistance that you need. And then also not being allowed to speak. There were many times I wanted to speak, asked to speak, but I was told that I could not speak. So over time, you just start to feel discouraged.
Well, I would agree with what Alisa said. I believe that would have been great to put on a comment card. All of those suggestions would have been really essential and would be great changes for the DV court to make. I think one of the biggest challenges, and it certainly affects some of the issues that Alisa experienced, is that we have a domestic violence bench that is not trained on domestic violence or sexual assault or the issues that survivors are presenting with when they come to the court for help. And I think when you have a specialty court like the Domestic Violence Division that primarily is focused on all aspects of gender-based violence, the judges who are deciding these cases have to understand the issue inside and out. We cannot have judges who are asking survivors why they are being hit. That is completely inappropriate. It is not an acceptable question. There is no reason for a survivor ever to be abused. And the fact that we have an active member of the domestic violence bench currently asking that question to survivors is completely inexcusable. And so that is first and foremost what I think we need is for the folks who are making these decisions that weigh so heavily on our families, weigh so heavily on our survivors, is that we need judges who understand the issue and a court response that's trauma informed, as Mallory mentioned earlier. We've had issues where attorneys and survivors and advocates are treated by judges probably very similar to how the abusive partners are treating their partners at home, right? Judges throwing things from the bench, for instance, demeaning advocates and attorneys in court. You can't have survivors come to court and think it's just like what's happening to them at home. And so I really think that the state of Illinois and Cook County has to take a hard look at how they require judges to be educated and trained, and how they discipline judges for misconduct on the bench, because it is completely unacceptable, and there's very little that we can get done until those key issues are resolved.
Mallory, you have anything to add to that?
I mean, Amanda and Alisa spoke so well. Everything they said times infinity. For me, it's really about everything they said, but money. We need money. Money is going to help get additional judges so that each judge doesn't have such a packed call. A commitment to the actual courthouse, which probably sounds silly, but it goes back to what Amanda was saying. Why are there judges on the bench that are not versed in all things relating to gender-based violence, including the basics that are the law? We talked about the 3 different protective orders. I can't count how many times judges got the 3 confused and made an inaccurate ruling. Even back in the day when the courthouse was open, the flow of how people move, which office you go to do things, that is not necessarily pro se friendly, despite the fact that that courthouse was made for individuals without attorneys. So money and a true commitment to the domestic violence courthouse, which would ensure that survivors are treated with the utmost respect and that the law is being followed, because one without the other doesn't mean anything.
And just to reiterate, when I referenced earlier to Ms. Brown that we often don't consider that the issues at 555 affect both survivors coming in as petitioners. It also affects survivors who are respondents. And when we have a judicial system that doesn't understand gender-based violence, you often see survivors charged with crimes when really they should absolutely not be. And so that judicial education serves the entire course of justice really, really well.
Thank you for that. Any final words that you want to share with attendees watching? Anything that you think they should take away from this event? And we can start with Alisa if you'd like.
Don't be afraid to speak your truth. Don't be afraid to fight for your future, for your life. Find a way. There are people out there that can help you. It may take some time, but don't be afraid to tell people what you're going through. Don't feel ashamed because of what you're going through. And just continue to find ways to keep yourself strong. And again, speak your truth, and there is help out there.
Mallory.
Second, everything Alisa said. Truly, as the lawyer, I am going to say, vote for your judges. There's so many of them, right? So many people are like, I don't know these people. I don't really care. Google it. Google those judges. Don't just pay attention to the Bar Association recommendations, because Judge Vega, for example, was endorsed by many of the bar associations. And so you have to do your research. Most people think, oh, I'm never going to come in front of a judge, but that is the case until it is not. And you want to make sure that the people that are on the bench have truly been vetted by the electorate, which is us.
Amanda.
Thanks. I agree with Alisa and Mallory. I think those are both great statements. Vet your judges and vote. And if you're a survivor of domestic and sexual violence, know that the system is challenging, but you should still come forward, even if you don't seek a criminal response. come forward and seek help. But safety and support is out there for you. The gender-based violence community has advocates and attorneys willing to help and ready to help. Even though resources are thin, you can always call the Illinois Domestic Violence Hotline for safety and support and for connection to an advocate or a community-based resource. And also, if you go to court, and as Mallory said, a judge listens to your emergency and doesn't feel the same way, know that that doesn't mean that you're not a survivor and that you can't seek help somewhere else, that one person's opinion doesn't negate your story and your experience. You can always reach out for safety and support. We will always believe you, and we will always be there to help you. The Illinois Domestic Violence Hotline is available via text or chat 24/7, always in English and Spanish with access to 240 other languages. It's 1-877-863-6338. Always reach out.
Thank you for that. Yeah, before we turn it over back to Maya, Mallory, Alisa, is there any other organizations that you want to plug, contact information that you want to make sure people know about, or upcoming events? Please feel free to share.
I would like to add one site that I have found is called the Roving Room. That's a website where various people who have been in and out of the courtrooms with various judges, you can type in the name of a judge and find what comments people have left about that judge. It's not associated with the court system, but it made me feel better once I was on that site and I read that so many other people had been through what I'd been through, that it wasn't just me. And it's called the Roving Room.
Thank you for that, Lisa.
And also in terms of voting, that's now when it's time for me to vote, I go to that site and I look up the other judges just to see what comments people have made about each judge.
I want to plug and thank Amanda and the network. The network is the entity that really gathers all of the folks in the room. And when I say all of the folks in the room, it's all of the agencies that provide assistance for survivors of domestic violence and survivors of sexual assault. And there is something really powerful about us coming together as a community, about us sharing information together as a community, and about us coming up with solutions to these problems. And so for the survivors out there, we as a collective are working for you, and we are all more powerful together than we are individually. So I just want to acknowledge that.
Well, thank you all again so much for your time and all the valuable insight you shared. I know I learned a lot, so really just thank you so much. I'm going to kick it back to Maya to wrap this event up.
Thank you so much. This was an incredible event. It was so great to hear from both survivors and advocates and organizers in this space. And thank you so much, Kelly, for all of your amazing reporting, your dogged reporting on this very important story and these issues. So thank you all for coming out for this. Hopefully everybody was able to take something useful away from the conversation. And just a couple of more plugs before we let you go for the evening. Thank you again to our hosts, Injustice Watch and the Chicago Reader. The Reader is Chicago's only alternative biweekly newspaper, one of the oldest alternative newspapers in the country. And it was my home for 5 years. So I'm really excited to be continuing to partner with the Reader and its journalists. So you can go to chicagoreader.com to check out Kelly's work and all the other amazing work that the Reader has been doing for 50 years now. And you can also support the work of the Reader, which is in the process of transitioning to a nonprofit now as well. And Injustice Watch is a nonprofit newsroom focusing on the legal system and producing Cook County's only independently researched judicial election guide. So to Mallory's earlier point about checking who you're voting for when you go to vote for judges, our entire organization is dedicated to the mission of providing a thoroughly researched election guide that you can actually take to the voting booth with you You can look at it on your phone. We have paper versions that we'll be printing as well in time for the primary election in June and also for the November general election. So there'll be a link that will drop in the chat. You can go to injusticewatch.org. We have a page there for everything related to the judicial election guide. You can sign up for our newsletter. You can give us feedback about the judicial candidates that are running. We have a survey going asking folks to share any experiences they might have had with these lawyers who are running for judge. There's about 60 people on that list now. And you can also donate, subscribe, and see all the different ways that you can get involved with our work. So again, chicagoreader.com and injusticewatch.org. And thank you so much, everybody, for coming out and for supporting our work. And thank you, Kelly, for all the wonderful work that you've been doing on this.
Absolutely. Thank you all. Have a good night.